in his sermon, kind of as he was opening up, he talked about, I think he called it DHS. Does anybody remember what that diagnosis or whatever stands for? Divided heart syndrome. Yeah, that stuck out to me. He said the idea that I can serve God and something else. And we have to be careful as we live our lives, and especially as we think about some of these things, that we don't divide things up too much as far as spiritual and non-spiritual. There are obviously things that are more spiritual and things that are less spiritual, but we are created body, soul, and spirit. God didn't. We don't just dwell on things that are completely spiritual, and it's not like we don't have any other needs. And I don't think Jesus was disregarding that fact at all as he went through the Sermon on the Mount and through this chapter. But at the same time, if you guys want, if you can listen and tally it up at the same time. Sorry, I didn't make that very clear. The idea that I can serve God and something else, it just doesn't work. So, in kingdom living in God's kingdom, being a part of his kingdom, and then also trying to live in this world has its challenges, and yet our allegiance, we know where our allegiance needs to be and what our purpose is. And I think so often, when we talk about Christianity sometimes, Christians, it's a little hard to know who we're referring to sometimes, because the term Christian we know is so broad. But a lot of, I think, who we call Christians, although we might not think of them as sincere Christians, people believing in God, professing Christians, I think a lot of professing Christians get things mixed up and put God second in comparison to other things that they might deem more important in life. And Jesus is telling us, again, going back to the way this chapter starts, take heed. Be on guard. Beware. Wide is the gate that leads to destruction. Many there be. A lot of people on that road. We have to be careful. 2 Corinthians 10:12, for we dare not make ourselves of the number or compare ourselves with some that commend themselves. But they, measuring themselves by themselves and comparing themselves among themselves, are not wise. And so as we look at this passage, we want to keep that in mind. Again, we want to align our lives to the Word of God and not align the Word of God to our lives. The first night I talked a little bit about security and significance, two basic needs. As you know, I talked about the class at SMBI. Frank talked about security and significance a lot. So I was thinking about this. Which category does this fall into in tonight's topic? Security or significance? I think in some ways it's both. But the tendency to use money to fill that need that we have for security, I think is pretty great. But it can also go beyond that and fill that need that we have for significance. And I know I shouldn't say it, I know I've struggled with both of those things on the subject or on the thing of money. Security, it can become my security. It can also become my significance, who I am. Money gives us a lot of power. Any thoughts on that? Psalmist says, he heapeth up riches and knoweth not, talking about me, and knoweth not who shall gather them. And now, Lord, what wait I for? My hope is in thee. And I hope that's us tonight. Our hope is in Jesus, not in the things we have, not in the abilities we have, not in anything that's not going to last. Our hope is grounded in truth and in Jesus. So let's get into the text. Can I have a volunteer to read verses 19 through 24, Matthew chapter 6? Somebody read verses 19 through 24. Pick on somebody. Thank you. Jake, go ahead.
Lay not up yourselves treasures upon earth, where moth and rust doth corrupt, and where thieves break through and steal. But lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor rust doth corrupt, and where thieves do not break through nor steal. For where your treasure is, there will your heart be also. The light of the body is the eye. If therefore thine eye be single, thy whole body shall be full of light. But if thine eye be evil, thy whole body shall be full of darkness. If therefore the light that is in thee be darkness, how great is that darkness? No man can serve two masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or else he will hold to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and money.
Thank you, Jake. So I'd like to just look at this a little bit, starting there in verse 19, and observe kind of what the text is saying. Lay not up for yourselves. I was looking at that, the first words there, not. The ESV would use the words do not, and that those two words do not in the ESV come through numerous times throughout the Bible. This Greek word, if you look at it, is actually 958 times it comes through. But the word not here is basically, from what I could find, it means what it's saying. Do not. It doesn't seem to be presented as an option. So, do not lay up. The idea there of storing up, the meaning there in the Greek to store up, treasure up, save, lay up. Seems to be speaking of extra things, putting things away. Do not lay up, or lay not up for yourselves treasures. And the word treasures there, again, basically precious things. In the Greek, a storehouse for precious things, hence a treasure, a store. And again, treasure seems to indicate luxury over necessities, things that are beyond needs. So, the rest of the text as we read down through this, but lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven. We have the same words coming through. It's telling us here what to do and what not to do. Lay not up for yourselves treasures upon earth, where moth and rust doth corrupt, and where thieves break through and steal. But lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor rust doth corrupt, and where thieves do not break through and steal, nor steal. For where your treasure is, there will your heart be also. And the word heart there, it can stand for your literal heart, but more often it's the mind, character, inner self, the will, the intention, the center. So nothing from this text seems to be far off of what the original, what Jesus was meaning in the original words here. What else do we observe from this passage? Looking at these words and their meanings and what this passage is saying.
Question, Tim. What about having some money in a savings account or something like that? Is that laying up treasures on that?
Well, the ant stores them for a season, for further. We're supposed to observe the ant.
It's a good question. John's question, what about savings, laying up savings on the earth, physical savings for future? Thank you. Any responses to that?
Last week I read in the Epoch magazine that there were 10 men of the richest men in the world featured, and most of them I think were in the $1 billion mark, and through the recession that we have already since the beginning of this year, they have lost billions of dollars, but they have billions left. One of them even has $1 trillion, which we can't imagine what that's about, but he also lost quite a bit. But, to me, that would be, they have plenty to go on now, whereas nobody needs $1 billion, even $1 billion, a little less than 70 or 80 or 85-year-old, life, does it?
Well, at least I don't need $1 billion as long as I have, maybe $1 million. Really, I'm not looking for $1 billion.
So getting back to what John is saying or asking here,
The real issue is what you do with the money and how you serve the Lord and serve the church. And that's, it's what you do with the money, not how much money you have.
well, getting to the text here, to Jesus, the real issue was the heart. He's concerned about where the heart is. And if you look at treasures or storing up, this is, speaking of a place, treasures, a storehouse for precious things. So where your treasure is, where your storehouse is, that's where your heart is also, in other words. If we take the Greek word there of storehouse for precious things, hence a treasure, a store. So when I think of a storehouse, I think of a place. And so that then can be a place where my heart is. Where your treasure is, that's where your heart is also. So savings, good question, and we'll probably come back to this a little bit. But yeah, at what point? And it's not just money. And I should say too here right away, I mean, and you all know me, so you know who I am, and I'm right here with the rest of you. And this passage is not new to us. I hope it can continue to challenge us. One of the things as we live life, this isn't new either, but we don't default towards God. People don't don't default towards God. We naturally, I'm saying humanly, from a human standpoint, you know how it is. We go away from God. We need to be continually challenged. Look at our lives. So I've enjoyed this study, but I want us to be open to where we can learn, but not necessarily trying to upset the fruit basket and say we have to change everything and that you have to get rid of your savings account, John. But I want to look, I want us to take a deep, honest look at what Jesus is saying here.
Well, concerning John's question, it seemed like in the time of the Egyptians, when the 7 years of plenty, Joseph had the wisdom and others to lay up in store for the lean years. So that would indicate clearly that certainly not wrong to have a savings account and, sometime, or is that right, for the future?
Yeah. No, I think that's,
I think we were all agree on that.
yeah, I think so too. I believe so.
So can you have a savings account and have it be a treasury?
Well, one thing I have to think is, it's your security. And that even what you have for the future could be taken just like that, with health reasons. You could soon spend it all. So I think we need to be careful not that what we have laid up is our security.
That it's not our security.
Yes.
So
I think it's important that we do.
I don't think this is splitting hairs, but it's our savings is there to so that we have things in the future. So in some ways, you're relying on that. You're getting older. Physically, you're not planning to work like you do now until you're 80 years old. So you're relying on that in some ways. But at the same time, you're right. Your security, if it's your security, if that's what you're putting your trust in, then we have a problem.
Well, I am sort of putting I am putting some trust in it. In my saving or for the future. But
Somewhat, yeah, but you're not.
I'm hoping it's gonna maybe outlast me.
I think you're being responsible, but you're not putting your full trust in it. Like this is either way. You're grounded in God. You know either way that He's your rock, right? And so it doesn't matter what happens. But I think sometimes, depending how we live our life and the decisions that we make, obviously can impact the way we think about money and our dependence on it.
So, getting back to Dad's question about, so we kind of need to define what treasure is, right?
So,
If treasure is treasure equals money, then yeah, we can't lay up any money. But Jesus, so in the one parable, God, or the master entrusted the servant with talents or whatever, which was money. And it was more about the way they were stewards of that money. So I don't know, this is completely me just thinking right now, but is it as much about how much our savings account or even is it about how much our savings account is, or is it about being stewards of what's actually God's and not, it gets into that ticky-tacky thing of is mine or is God's?
it does, yeah, and there's obviously the thing of motives. So you're right, we have to define treasure, and I want to get to that. I'd like to look at, just run over a couple of passages that are correlating to this. Some of them in the other Gospels, there's a little bit of variety here, and then we'll get into that a little bit deeper. But yeah, you're right, we do have to define what treasure is. So, Matthew chapter 19, verse 21. If thou wilt be perfect, go and sell that thou hast, and give to the poor, and thou shalt have treasure in heaven, and come and follow me. Luke 12:33 and 34. Sell your possession and give to the needy. Provide yourselves with money bags that do not grow old, with a treasure in the heavens that does not fail, where no thief approaches and no moth destroys. Luke 16:13. No servant can serve two masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or he will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and money. Basically hearing the same verse that we were just talking about. James 5, verses 1 through 6. Come now, you rich, weep and howl for the miseries that are come upon you. Your riches have rotted, and your garments are moth-eaten. Your gold and silver have corroded, and their corrosion will be evidence against you, and will eat your flesh like fire. You have laid up treasure in the last days. Matthew 13:44. The kingdom of heaven is like treasure hidden in a field, which a man found and covered up. Then in his joy he goes and sells all that he has and buys that field. There Jesus speaking in a parable. So, adding these verses into the equation, again, these are verses that seem to imply sort of the same message there. What is the passage saying? How do we interpret it? Go sell what you have and give to the poor. So do we just sell out and expect that everything will be taken care of? In James, the passage there in James, Jesus is warning in chapter 6 here of what can happen. James almost is implying what has happened. Your riches have rotted, and your garments are moth-eaten. Your gold and silver have corroded, and their corrosion will be evidence against you, and will eat your flesh like fire. You have laid up treasure in the last days. So I think it's key what you're saying, Doug. The one thing that you're saying is that we are stewards, and it's not ours. And I can forget that so easy. That's not just my money, but that's my time, my family. We're stewards of what God gives us, and there's a lot of responsibility that comes with that. How much
How much of your master's treasure is the steward allowed to use? I think that's what we're really asking is what can I use? What's okay? That's the real question.
I think so. It's hard because we live in very prosperous times. I don't know that times have ever been easier. I mean, Paul, nobody before you milked cows without actually milking cows, right? You still have one of the harder jobs here, but I really appreciate Paul. Paul and I, I'll introduce you tomorrow night. But no, getting back on track here, it's important. Jesus brought this topic up a lot. If you look at the word rich or riches in the New Testament, most of the times when it comes up, as long as when it's talking about riches, when When it's talking about spiritual things, it's positive. Most of the times, the word rich in the New Testament is referring to negative things or in negative context, negative connotation. I think we do good to be aware of that. So, Jesus, yes.
Doesn't this really just boil down to one thing, and it's called stewardship? And we know that the Lord owns everything that we own, which we don't really own, but it belongs to the Lord. That's our land, our money, our vehicles, everything. And so everything that we do should be looked at as, is this proper stewardship of the Lord's money or materials or whatever? And sometimes it becomes obvious to you that this is not good stewardship, and you seek another way or something. But as far as treasures, some people collect things for the purpose of collecting them. And they collect millions of dollars of oil paintings and stuff like that, just to have them and hoard them and look at them, not because they expect to turn them over and make money off of it, or bequeath it to a nonprofit, or do something good with it. But I think everything that we've read so far really just is one word takes care of it, and that's stewardship of the Lord's, everything that we have, proper stewardship.
So, yes, it does boil a lot down to stewardship. How are we doing as stewards then? You have the responsible stewards, you have the irresponsible stewards. It's still, it's something that, like I was saying, Jesus brings this subject up time and time again in the New Testament. It was interesting to me as I was just looking at different passages and words coming up. Jesus, so there's one time, there's some times that Jesus might have got a little bit riled up or excited with the Pharisees, but there's one time that we think of him being angry. What comes to your mind when you think of Jesus being angry? Maybe I shouldn't use that term, but more or less. He actually got physical with them. And do you remember his words? Make not my Father's house an house of merchandise. I never really thought about that much. I mean, it makes complete sense what Jesus was saying, but why was he so?
People were taking advantage of the poor.
There was not a place to sell stuff at that courtyard.
And the poor were being neglected, and the poor were becoming more poor, and they were becoming rich. That was an Old Testament already. It's something that grieved the heart of God, and as we see.
So thank you for bringing that out. They were taking advantage of the poor. They were being greedy, but we don't see Jesus picking up a whip any other time that I know of, or reacting to that extent. And I found it interesting. I had never tied these passages together before, but 1 Corinthians chapter 3, verse 13, Emmanuel in his devotions a few weeks ago had talked about this passage where we are building God's house, and every man's work is going to be tested, whether it's silver, gold, wood, hay, stubble. I should turn to that passage. 1 Corinthians chapter 3, verses 13 through 17. So could someone read that for us? First Corinthians chapter 3, verses 13 through 17. Any volunteers? Dave, are you there? 13 through 17.
1 Corinthians 3, 13 and 17. Every man's work shall be made manifest, for the day shall declare it, because it shall be revealed by fire. And the fire shall try every man's work of what sort it is. If any man's work abide which he hath built thereupon, he shall receive a reward. If any man's work shall be burned, he shall suffer loss. But he himself shall be saved, yet so as by fire. Know ye not that ye are the temple of God, and that the Spirit of God dwells in you? If any man defile the temple of God, him shall God destroy. For the temple of God is holy, which temple ye are.
So, if any man build upon this house gold, silver, precious stones, wood, hay, stubble, every man's work shall be made manifest, whatever we are building this temple out of. Know ye not that ye are the temple of God, and that the Spirit of God dwelleth in you? So, if we think of, we are the temple. This church is where we come to, but we are the temple now. If any man defile the temple of God, him shall God destroy. So how do we defile God's temple? Again, he's talking about how we're building the temple. And I think that has to do with how we're living our lives, how we're being stewards, back to what George and Doug were saying, of what we have. And this goes beyond this subject of money, but how we're living our lives. If any man defile the temple of God, him shall God destroy, for the temple of God is holy, which temple ye are. And so, going back to Floyd's point, Jesus was upset. They were taking advantage of the poor. They were concerned about building their own wealth. And they were doing it in God's temple. And I think this plays into our lives too. When we're taking advantage of people, when we're trying to build up our own self. We are the temple of God.
You're talking about the body and the spirit. Body, the person, us. So which means alcohol, tobacco, drugs can defile the temple. In other words, you're abusing the work of God. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's more than that. Yes, our body is the temple, but also it goes beyond that. God's Spirit dwells in our spirit, which I believe is also the temple of God. It goes beyond my physical self. I think. Any other, if you're following what George is saying, any other input on that? The temple is more than just my physical body. Yes, I agree. I need to take care of my physical body. But I believe when God's Spirit comes into me, He changes me at my core. At my spirit is where He really dwells. Does that make sense? Anybody want to weigh in? Any comments?
Our stewardship, from the scripture in Deuteronomy, where God told Israel that when you come in this good land and have all these good things, then He said, beware lest you forget the Lord God. And He said, remember that it's the Lord that gives you power to get wealth.
What was that?
He said, remember that it's the Lord that gives you power to get wealth.
Thank you for sharing that, John.
The story that Jesus gave with the farmer that had a big crop and he took his barns down and built bigger barns. But his reason for doing that was wrong. He
Mm-hmm.
There's nothing wrong with him building bigger barns, but if he could have used the extra profit to further the kingdom of God rather than just plan on a life of ease and even a life that wasn't even pleasing to God, I think he could have built his bigger barns and there wouldn't have been anything wrong with it.
So there's two things that Jesus said after that story. He said, "So is he that buildeth up treasure for himself, and is not rich towards God." So you're right on the combination there. Going back to the thing of stewardship again. In that story, it was for himself, and he was not rich towards God. So thank you for bringing that up. We're lifting an offering again this evening, so I think if Matthew and a couple of you trustees could help him. Dwayne, there you are. If you could lead a song, let's stand for a song, and we'll pass the offering and take a little break.
There is beyond the
Azure blue, a God concealed from human sight. He tinted skies with heavenly hue, and framed the world with his great might.
There is a God, He is alive. In Him we live and we survive. From dust our God, created
Okay, you can be seated. By the way, that from that little survey, thank you for filling those out. Looks like we're pretty much in the middle for how we see for the other church. We see ourselves on the personal. The way I handle my financial resources, whether they be few or many, reflects that I serve one master, God. And we think of ourselves a little bit better than we think of the group of other people. I don't know how that would reflect if we're looking at our church. Obviously, the true numbers would correlate completely because we're the same group of people. It's the same poll, but that's how we tend to think. I know that's how I tend to think. We tend to look at others, and we usually don't. The tendency is to think more highly of ourselves than we ought to. And of course, the difference here is not great, which is good. But we give ourselves a little bit more benefit of the doubt than we do the people around us from this little poll. It's natural. It's how we think. But I guess this helps us too to beware. Sometimes there are things that we can't see. Things, I know I have them. We need to speak into each other's lives, encourage each other, exhort each other, and help each other on this and really everything in the Christian lives as we're stewards. So jumping back in here, again, thanks Mel for those comments. Eternal treasure. So if we're talking about treasure, maybe we should start with treasures on earth. How do we lay up treasures on earth? What are these treasures that Jesus is talking about? Your ideas.
Question I asked a while back came sort of from a comment
comment that I heard a brother make one time, and he felt that, I forget, he used the figure 100,000 or what, but he felt if we have that amount in the savings account or somewhere laid up, then a part of our heart is bound to be there. He's referring to this verse when the treasure is in the heart also. I don't quite agree with that our heart needs to be there. But could ask the question then, well, how small does that account have to be until your heart is not there? So I think probably the comment that was made about defining what treasure is.
The reality is that you know, people who don't have treasure can fall into the same, as in people that don't have anything that could even don't have things to lay up, don't even have a savings account, can still fall into the same trap of you know, through covetousness and whatever, of wanting things and wanting to rely on things that are not for the disciple of Jesus Christ. So, yes, defining what that treasure is, going back again, going back to what you were saying, Doug and George, we have in verse 19, it's for us, laying up for yourselves treasures upon earth, losing focus of whose we are, losing focus of whose our things are. Lay not up for yourselves treasures upon earth. So, defining treasure, building my own kingdom, obviously there's a lot of things that can fall into that category then, if it's about me. If it's about God, He's the judge. For us here as a church. So, how do we encourage each other? What you know, we can all say it's all God's. How do we keep each other accountable? This is something that Jesus is saying is Jesus said it so many times. I mean, he said it's harder for a rich man, we know it, to get into the kingdom of heaven. It's easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle. It's so dangerous. So, go ahead, Dave.
I know what treasure is. I've often thought to myself, especially now, that the greatest gift a man can have is that gift of salvation, grace, the Lord, this church, and the people inside it. That is a treasure. The greatest gift a man can have is a loving and caring wife. That really is right there at the top of the list next to the Lord Himself. But other than that, other things, like material goods, like vehicles and stuff like that, they're not treasures, they're things that theoretically are supposed to do a job. But some treasures are very important. And the church is one. Like, for instance, somebody made a comment about the fact about gasoline now being $6 a gallon. And it takes me 35 minutes to get here. And while you're doing it, you can feel as though something's going gulp, 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 gulp. And yet, that, I think, is good stewardship of the Lord's money, to spend the money for the gasoline to get here. The church, that'd be the last thing that we would stop doing. Whereas a lot of people don't think nothing of going to the store, going to Costco, you know, a 25 or 30 mile round trip or something like that, maybe several times a week. Not necessarily good stewardship. And I'm not claiming to do good stewardship all the time. I've had a lot of failures
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up. I think, with our resources, and obviously a car is a car. To some it is, to some it isn't. Whether we are good stewards here tonight, or whether we're, if we think of ourselves as good stewards, or we have areas to grow in one place, one area or another. We also have the next generation that we are teaching and training. And if their opportunities in this world are as great as ours, they'll have as many challenges in that battle of stewardship. Dave, you were going to say something.
Well, it might be changing the subject a little bit, but I've been observing, God that has blessed people with finances, and how some people respond. Some people have a lot of money and they build. There's nothing wrong with buying a cabin, going to the mountains, but then I also observe people that have been blessed financially. They don't have a cabin. They don't have a whole lot of places to just relax, go to relax. And whenever the church doors open, they're there. They're here Wednesday evenings. They're here Sundays, for church, not weekends, going a lot. And I appreciate that. And I observe those men.
So that brings up something too. Again, human tendency. I can tend to judge other people on the thing of finances, on a lot of different things. But I think it says something about our heart, about our true concerns, depending how we react. Judge not, that ye be not judged. God is our judge. So I believe firmly that we do need to encourage each other. We do need to keep each other sharp, and we want to encourage each other towards good stewardship. But I think sometimes our comments can be out of maybe jealousy, or if we think somebody's getting away with something. That's not my responsibility. That's not. That should not be my concern for speaking up about a situation. So kind of going back to what you're saying there, yes, some people have things and other people are faithful. Have the resources, but are faithful in their calling. So, John, you were mentioning amounts. You start naming amounts, it's really not a good place to go. Jesus didn't do that either. By the way, we don't see him making thresholds. There are certain expectations, and if I keep moving here, we can get to some of those other verses for those who are rich. But not giving thresholds as to when you have too much money.
It seems to me, as I observe people and observe myself, that the whole, I could keep going back to Dave's story of feeding of contentment. If we can just exercise contentment, I think it probably takes care of a lot of I think it was about 5 of the men that Floyd was talking about earlier, the 5 or 10 richest men. I think at least 5 of those in the last 2 years divorced their wives. I think this whole thing of just exercising a gratefulness for what God has entrusted to you, rather than just living a life of give me.
Question, and one is laying up for treasures in heaven.
So that's next on the list here, Floyd. Well, Matthew 10:42, if anyone gives even a cup of cold water to one of these little ones who is my disciple, and I know at least Miss Marilyn has done plenty of that, truly I tell you, that person will certainly not lose their reward. So there's a reward for giving something as simple as giving a cup of water. There are, obviously, we talked about in the first evening, Matthew chapter 5, verse 13, "You are the light of the world, you are the salt of the earth. Let your light so shine before men that they may see your good works and glorify your Father which is in heaven." And I think we're laying up treasure by the way we live our lives. Psalm 127, "The fruit of the womb is his reward." And we are blessed with, whether it's children in our lives that we mentor and encourage, or children given in our own families through birth. The fruit of the womb is his reward. And we're dealing with young people. We're dealing with eternal souls. So I think there's a treasure that maybe we don't see Jesus alluding to as much here, but an eternal treasure that we're dealing with. We have God's word talks different times about the treasure there. Even persecution. And I know we're not inviting persecution. Matthew chapter 5, verse 12, "Rejoice and be exceeding glad, for great is your reward in heaven. For so persecuted they the prophets which were before you." Great is your reward. You're getting something for being persecuted. When men say things about you, when men say, I'm trying to think how verse 11 says it there. "Blessed are ye when men shall revile you and persecute you, and shall say all manner of evil against you falsely for my sake. Rejoice and be exceeding glad, because your reward in heaven is great." I guess that's treasure in heaven.
First Timothy chapter 6, Dave read the verse out of there, verses 17 through 19, gives some instruction for how the rich in this world can lay up treasures in heaven.
Go ahead. Yeah, I have. Was getting to that, but go ahead, read it. I was almost there. Actually, maybe one other verse on this persecution. Moses. This is in the New Testament, Hebrews, but it's speaking of Moses. "He considered the reproach of Christ greater wealth than the treasures of Egypt, for he had respect unto the recompense of the reward." In other words, he knew he was going to be rewarded. He knew he was going to be settled up. He considered the reproach of Christ greater wealth than the treasures of Egypt. I think that is part. We see Moses. We know his example. He was a leader. It wasn't that he was just completely heavenly minded, but that he lived his life, body, soul, and spirit. The things he did was influenced by his service to God, his resignation to God, and his eternal perspective. He considered the reproach of Christ greater than what he was born into, the treasures of Egypt. John, 1 Timothy 6, 17 through 19.
Go ahead and read it if you have.
Turn there.
So I'll read it.
Okay.
"Charge them that are rich in this world, that they be not high-minded, nor trusting on certain riches, but in the living God who giveth us richly all things to enjoy. That they do good, that they be rich in good works, ready to distribute, willing to communicate, laying up in store for themselves a good foundation against the time to come, that they may lay hold on eternal life."
So, jumping down through my notes here, are we rich?
Yeah, we're rich. Salvation.
Yeah, we're rich in that too.
As far as
Uh,
earthly wealth, I think-
Yes, as far as earthly wealth.
I think Gary Miller would say, looking at 100 people, we would be in the top 1%.
We are. And those verses, I think we do well to take heed to that, the responsibility given to us. Charge those that are rich, being generous with our wealth. We talked about that on Monday night.
The question
The-
I have is, Floyd asked the question, what is those heavenly riches? You know,
You're saying the actual reward,
Yeah.
like what was Moses going for?
let's just say Floyd spent a lot of time investing here and gave eternal rewards, put eternal rewards that he laid up through his life. I became a Christian and I didn't do much, and we both are in heaven. My reward just as great as Floyd's? Or what does Floyd get out of? You know, like the thief at the cross, he didn't do a whole lot. Is his reward just as great as Floyd's that poured, invested a lot of time? We both made it to heaven.
You won't be jealous and you won't be proud.
But does he get a greater reward? I'm just wondering, what is that reward? If it's just getting into heaven, or is there something more? I don't know. I know there's something about crowns. I'm not sure how that always lands, that we lay crowns at Jesus' feet. There's a song, Must I Go Empty-Handed? I'm not sure how that always. Floyd, do you have anything on that?
Well, we do read in the scriptures about those going to hell, that some will be beaten with few stripes, others with many. I would think that in heaven there'll be some degree of rewards, but like Ben said, even those who just labored maybe for a few minutes got the same reward as those who labored for 11 hours. There's different equations here, the whole thing.
Yeah, that's.
We get over yonder, our rewards will seem so small compared to what Jesus did for us. We'll throw our crowns before his feet.
I thought the Bible says, and I can't point right to it, just like you did. Jesus told one of the Pharisees that your punishment will be far greater than so-and-so's punishment. So apparently punishments will vary depending upon how you were and what you did. Well, the same thing with reward. Some people, I believe, that will get greater rewards in heaven than others. I don't know whether they'll have a penthouse or what, but yeah. I mean, you look at people that have spent their entire lives as missionaries in a foreign land through all kinds of tribulation, etc. And I look at that as surely their rewards will be far greater than, say, like my reward. If I have one. But
I'm not sure.
the Bible, I thought was explicit on that.
I'm not sure I agree with that. The mother that faithfully raises her children is honorable as the foreign missionary.
Sorry, my thoughts were racing ahead, but yes. So we do have to bring this to a close. But yeah, and Dave, there's a lot to explore there. I think just from personal experience, when my focus is on myself and how I could build my little thing, obviously selfishness, I'm concerned about the reward. But when my focus is on serving Jesus, then, and I'm sure you agree with me, Dave, I think so, but I'm not concerned about the reward then. I'm concerned about serving Jesus. And
But he's encouraging us.
yeah, but no,
We're saying, don't worry about it.
No, I'm not saying I'm not saying don't worry about it. I'm just saying when you're in love with Jesus, then some of those things are not a concern. Yes or no? I think that's how it is. I mean, that'll take care of itself.
It will.
So, yeah, I know we're on the same page.
Doesn't the one parable reference to that a little bit, or it could, in Matthew 20, like where each of the workers were paid equally, even though they all worked the same amount of time?
Where Jesus was telling them to be, content with what they have. We need to close. Thank you for your thoughts. There's a lot more that we could talk about here. Keep your life free from the love of money and be content with what you have. Seek ye first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things shall be added unto you. We're ready, Matthew. Sorry.